Alistair Finch measured the world in carats and thread counts, in the silent, deferential nods of men who feared him and the sharp, envious glances of those who wished to be him. His heart was a vault, cold and secure, where sentiment was filed away as a non-performing asset. He stood in the entrance of the Gilded Spoon, a restaurant that was an anomaly in his portfolio of polished steel and glass towers. It was old, paneled in wood the color of dark honey, and smelled of beeswax and something else, something warm and unquantifiable, which irritated him immensely. He was here to purchase it, to strip it of its irritating warmth and refit it as another monument to his own cold success. His suit was a whisper of Italian wool, so dark it seemed to drink the light from the restaurant's amber sconces. His watch was a sliver of platinum and starlight, a device that didn't just tell time, but judged it. He saw the owner, Arthur Thompson, a man whose age was written not in wrinkles, but in a kind of gentle transparency, as if life had worn him down to his purest, most breakable elements. Alistair's smile was thin as a paper cut, a prelude to a wound. He approached the old man, his polished shoes making no sound on the plush runner, a predator in a peaceful forest. Across the room, Samuel Croft moved with a practiced, weightless grace. He was the restaurant's head waiter, a fixture as permanent as the oak bar and the faded mural of a forgotten harvest on the far wall. His uniform was simple black and white, impeccably clean but showing the subtle sheen of age at the cuffs and collar. He was a man who had learned to make himself invisible, to anticipate a need before it was spoken, to be a silent cog in the machinery of other people's comfort. His face was a placid lake, but deep beneath the surface, a profound and ancient sorrow lay settled like silt. It was a grief so old it had become a part of his bones, a quiet ache that informed the gentleness in his hands as he refilled a water glass or folded a napkin. The Gilded Spoon was not merely a place of employment for Samuel, it was a sanctuary. It was the last quiet place in a world that had screamed at him. Mr. Thompson had given him the job years ago, seeing not a broken man but a steady one, a soul in need of rhythm and purpose. And Samuel had repaid that kindness with a loyalty as fierce and silent as his grief. He watched Alistair Finch now, this man who moved as if he were made of different, harder materials than the rest of humanity, and he felt a familiar, low hum of caution. He had seen men like Finch before, men who saw the world as a thing to be consumed, not cherished. The central object of this quiet, unfolding drama was the restaurant itself, a place that stubbornly valued memory over profit. Its worth wasn't in its balance sheets, which were respectable enough, but in the stories absorbed by its wooden walls. And at the heart of its legend was a single dish, an item on the menu known simply as solace soup. It was the reason gourmands and critics made pilgrimages here. Its recipe was a secret known only to Mr. Thompson and its mysterious, unnamed creator. It tasted, as one critic had famously written, like a memory of a day you thought you had forgotten, a moment of perfect, unassailable peace. It was this soup, this intangible asset, that Alistair Finch could not comprehend and therefore despised. It represented a value his money could not immediately quantify or control. Alistair's internal monologue was a series of calculations. The real estate is prime. The brand has a cult following. Gut the interior, triple the prices, franchise the name. The old man is sentimental. That is his weakness. He saw Samuel moving between tables, and his gaze sharpened with contempt. This is the problem. Dead weight, old fixtures, old staff. Loyalty is a liability in a modern business. He believed kindness was a form of financial mismanagement, a luxury that sensible men pruned away like dead branches. He was here to prove that everything and everyone had a price. The conversation between Alistair and Thompson had been brief and brutal. Alistair had made his offer, a sum so large it was obscene, an act of financial violence intended to shock and awe. Mr. Thompson, however, had simply shaken his head, his smile gentle but his eyes firm. "This place is not for sale, Mr. Finch," he had said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of conviction. "It is not a property. It is a legacy." Alistair had felt a flash of hot rage, a feeling he despised for its inefficiency. His power was being denied. His checkbook, the scepter with which he ruled his kingdom, was being treated as irrelevant. He needed to reassert control, to demonstrate in the clearest possible terms the fundamental truth of his world. Money was the only real power. He scanned the dining room, his eyes landing once more on Samuel Croft, who was now speaking softly to an elderly couple, his head inclined with a genuine, unforced respect. The sight of it, this simple act of human dignity, was like a splinter under Alistair's nail. It was inefficient. It was worthless. And he would prove it. He raised his voice, a deliberate crack of a whip in the civilized murmur of the restaurant. "Thompson," he called out, the name a sharp, disrespectful bark. "You speak of legacy. Let's talk about your assets." Every conversation in the room faltered. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The soft clinking of crystal and silver ceased. A thick, expectant silence descended, heavy and uncomfortable. This was Alistair's element. He thrived in the discomfort of others. Mr. Thompson turned slowly, his expression one of weary patience. He knew what was coming. It was the classic maneuver of the bully. When unable to conquer the fortress, attack the villagers. Alistair pointed a single, perfectly manicured finger at Samuel, who had frozen mid-gesture, his hand hovering over a water pitcher. "Him," Alistair declared, his voice ringing with theatrical contempt. "Your most loyal employee, I presume. The one who has been here since the dawn of time." Samuel stood perfectly still, his face unreadable. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He simply waited, a statue of quiet endurance in the center of the storm. "Samuel is the heart of this restaurant," Mr. Thompson said, his voice low and dangerous. Alistair let out a short, cruel laugh. It was a sound like ice cubes rattling in an empty glass. "The heart? The heart is a muscle, Thompson. It can be replaced. Let me prove it to you." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and withdrew a checkbook and a pen made of polished obsidian. The click of the pen was unnaturally loud in the silent room. He scribbled for a moment, his movements sharp and precise. He tore the check from the book with a sound like tearing silk. He strode forward and slapped the check down on the table between them. $75,000, Alistair announced, his voice a blade meant to cut through Thompson's sentimentality. "That is my offer. Not for the restaurant. For his job." He turned his gaze on the old owner, a triumphant, predatory glint in his eyes. "Fire him. Right now. In front of everyone. Prove to me this is a business, not a home for stray dogs. Prove to me you understand value." The challenge hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was an act of breathtaking cruelty, designed not just to humiliate Samuel, but to force Thompson into an impossible corner. To choose between his principles and the public demonstration of his powerlessness against a man like Alistair Finch. The wealthy patrons watched, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and second-hand shame. They were the audience for this brutal piece of theater, and their silence was a form of complicity. They were members of Alistair's world, a world where such transactions were not only possible, but logical. A few of the younger, more ruthless men at a nearby table smirked, recognizing the cold, hard calculus of the move. An older woman in pearls looked down at her plate, her face flushed with embarrassment. Samuel felt the weight of every eye in the room. He felt their pity, their curiosity, their faint contempt. It was a familiar feeling, the burden of the invisible man suddenly made hyper-visible, turned into a specimen under a microscope. For a moment, the floor seemed to tilt beneath his feet. The old grief, the one he kept so carefully packed away, threatened to stir. But then he looked at Mr. Thompson. He saw the fire in the old man's eyes, the unwavering line of his jaw, and Samuel's own spine stiffened. He would not give this cold man the satisfaction of seeing him break. He straightened his shoulders and met Alistair Finch's gaze directly, his expression calm, his dignity an invisible shield. Inside Alistair's mind, the victory was already assured. He had framed the conflict perfectly. If Thompson refused, he was a fool, a sentimental old man who didn't understand business, publicly proven weak. If he accepted, Alistair would have broken him, proving his point that everything and everyone had a price. The $75,000 was a pittance to him, the cost of a particularly instructive lesson. He watched Thompson's face, waiting for the flicker of calculation, the moment the old man would weigh his heart against a sum that could solve a dozen practical problems. But the flicker never came. Mr. Thompson did not even look at the check. He looked at Samuel, and in that look, there was a universe of shared history, respect, and quiet understanding. Then he turned his eyes back to Alistair Finch, and they were as cold and hard as river stones. "There is not enough money in your bank, Mr. Finch," he said, his voice perfectly level, "to purchase a single ounce of this man's integrity." He paused, letting the words settle into the profound silence. "And you, sir, are no longer welcome in my establishment. Please leave." It was a simple declarative sentence, but it was also a detonation. Alistair was momentarily stunned. He was not used to being dismissed. He was the one who did the dismissing. A dark flush crept up his neck. His performance had been rejected. His power had been denied. The audience was now watching him, not Thompson, waiting to see how the Titan would react to being told no. "You're a fool," Alistair hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You would choose this nobody, over a fortune? What is he? What has he ever done that makes him worth more than this?" He gestured contemptuously at the check on the table. "He pours water. He carries plates. A trained monkey could do his job. What is his value?" That was the moment, the question that broke the spell. Mr. Thompson smiled, but it was a grim, sad smile. "You are a man who understands price, Mr. Finch, but you have no concept of value. You ask what Samuel does? You ask what he is worth?" He took a step back, turning to address not just Alistair, but the entire silent room. His voice rose, filled with a strength that belied his age. "Ladies and gentlemen, many of you have dined here for years. You have ordered our most famous dish, the one thing that cannot be replicated, the solace soup." A murmur went through the room. Everyone knew the soup. It was the restaurant's soul. You have praised it. Critics have written poems about it. Chefs from around the world have tried and failed to decipher its secret. Mr. Thompson's gaze settled on Samuel, who stood as still as ever, but whose eyes now held a deep, shimmering light. You want to know this man's value, Mr. Finch? He said, his voice ringing with a terrible clarity. Allow me to show you. Samuel is not my waiter, Mr. Thompson declared, his voice a clarion call in the cathedral-like silence. He is the artist. He is the creator of the Solace soup. He is the secret you all came here to taste. He is the reason this restaurant exists. The reveal landed with the force of a physical blow. A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. Patrons turned to stare at Samuel, truly seeing him for the first time. The invisible man was suddenly illuminated, cast in a brilliant, shocking new light. He was not just the waiter, he was the master. The humble servant was the secret king. Alistair Finch's face went slack with disbelief. His mind, a finely tuned engine of logic and calculation, stalled. The data did not compute. The world had just been turned upside down. The man he had dismissed as worthless, a replaceable cog, was in fact the central pillar of the entire enterprise. The asset he had tried to have discarded was the one priceless thing in the entire room. His public humiliation of Samuel had just transformed into a catastrophic self-own. Samuel, under the sudden weight of 100 stares, felt a lifetime of invisibility fall away from him like a heavy cloak. He met Mr. Thompson's eyes, and the old man gave him a small, encouraging nod. The moment was here. It was time. He did not make a grand speech. His power was not in words, but in his craft. He walked slowly, deliberately, to a small side table where a single, perfect leek, a bowl of cream, and a sprig of thyme had been placed as a garnish centerpiece. He picked up the leek. His movements were spare, economical, and imbued with a reverence that was hypnotic. He turned it over in his hands, his fingers tracing the lines of its growth. "The soup," Samuel began, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, "is not about a recipe." His voice was deeper than they expected, resonant with a quiet authority that bore no trace of his waiter's deference. It is about a feeling. The leek. It grows in the dark soil. It pushes its way toward the light. It holds the memory of the earth, of cold nights and patient sun. To understand the soup, you must first understand the ingredients' stories. He spoke of the thyme, how its scent was the memory of a warm afternoon. He spoke of the cream, how it was the essence of patience and gentle transformation. He was not describing a cooking process. He was narrating a philosophy. He was translating the language of grief and comfort into the language of food. The room was utterly captivated. This was not a waiter. This was a poet, a maestro. The power dynamic had not just been inverted, it had been shattered. Samuel was now the center of gravity, and everyone else, including the billionaire Alistair Finch, was merely a satellite in his orbit. As if on cue, a woman rose from a quiet corner table. She was elegant, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of indisputable authority. She was Genevieve Dubois, the world's most feared and respected food critic. Her reviews could make or break a restaurant overnight. Alistair Finch knew who she was. Her presence here was a testament to the restaurant's quality. "Mr. Thompson is telling the truth," she said, her voice a crisp, clear note. Every head swiveled towards her. "I have been dining here, anonymously, for a decade," she continued, her gaze fixed on Samuel with something akin to reverence. "I have eaten in every 3-star Michelin restaurant on the planet. I have tasted the creations of culinary gods. And I can tell you, without any hyperbole, that the man standing before you is a genius of the highest order." She took a step forward, her eyes now locking onto Alistair Finch. 5 years ago, I was commissioned to find a new head chef for Le Ciel in Paris. I offered the position to Samuel Croft. The salary was astronomical, the prestige unparalleled. It would have made him a global icon. She let that sink in. The name Le Ciel was legendary. He turned me down, Genevieve said, her voice softening. He said his work was here. He said he had a debt of loyalty to Mr. Thompson that no amount of money could repay. He chose this quiet room over the world stage. She looked directly at Alistair, her expression one of withering pity. You, sir, offered $75,000 to fire a man who walked away from millions out of principle. You tried to put a price on loyalty itself. You have not just made a fool of yourself. You have revealed a poverty of spirit so profound it is frankly breathtaking. The words were like expertly thrown knives. Each one found its mark. The smirks on the faces of the younger men had vanished, replaced by open-mouthed shock. The business associate Alistair had been trying to impress was now looking at him with undisguised contempt. In the space of 5 minutes, Alistair Finch's reputation, his most carefully curated asset, had been incinerated. The viral video was already being filmed on a dozen phones. The story would be everywhere by morning. The billionaire who tried to buy a man's soul and discovered it was not for sale at any price. Mr. Thompson walked over to the table where the check lay, a flimsy piece of paper representing a world view that had just been proven bankrupt. He picked it up, not with anger, but with a kind of sorrowful finality. He did not tear it. That would have been too dramatic, too much a part of Alistair's world of grand, empty gestures. Instead, he held it out to Alistair. I believe this is yours, he said quietly. Alistair stood frozen, his face a mask of concrete. His mind was a maelstrom of rage, humiliation, and a terrifying, unfamiliar feeling. Doubt. He had built his entire life on a single, unshakable premise, and that premise had just been publicly falsified. He felt the foundations of his identity cracking beneath him. He snatched the check from Thompson's hand, the reflexive action of a man grabbing for a handhold as he falls. He turned without another word and walked towards the door. His stride was still long and purposeful, but the arrogance was gone. It was the walk of a defeated king leaving his own throne room. The entire restaurant watched him go, the silence his only escort. The heavy oak door swung shut behind him, and the warm, amber light of the gilded spoon seemed to reclaim the space he had violated. For a long moment, the room remained silent. Then, slowly, one person began to clap. It was Geneviève Dubois. Then another joined in, and another, until the entire restaurant erupted in a wave of applause. It was not for the drama. It was for Samuel. It was for Mr. Thompson. It was for the quiet, stubborn victory of a value that had no price tag. Samuel Croft, the man who had spent a lifetime making himself invisible, stood in the center of the room, bathed in the warmth of their respect, and for the first time in years, the old grief in his bones felt a little bit lighter. The days that followed were a quiet hell for Alistair Finch. The story, as predicted, went viral. It was spun as a modern-day fable, The Billionaire and the Waiter, a morality tale for the digital age. His name became a byword for arrogant folly. Business partners called, their voices laced with a new, cautious distance. A major deal he had been structuring for months suddenly hit a snag. The carefully constructed edifice of his power, built on a reputation of ruthless invincibility, was showing cracks. He was used to being feared. Now he was a punchline. He locked himself in his penthouse apartment, a sterile glass box suspended high above the city. The view, which usually filled him with a sense of dominion, now felt like a mockery. He saw the sprawling metropolis below, a complex web of lives and stories, and for the first time, he felt utterly disconnected from it. He had treated people as pawns, as numbers on a spreadsheet, and now he was paying the price. The silence of the apartment was deafening. It was the same silence that had filled his life since his wife, Eleanor, had died. But now it had a different quality. Before, it was the silence of control. Now it was the silence of exile. He kept replaying the scene in his mind. The look in Samuel Croft's eyes. The quiet, unshakable dignity. The words of the food critic, Geneviève Dubois, which had flayed him open for all to see. He had tried to expose a weakness and had instead stumbled upon an incomprehensible strength. He could not understand it. Loyalty, principle, art. These were abstract concepts to him, luxuries for those who could not afford real power. Yet, they had defeated him more thoroughly than any corporate rival ever had. He needed to understand. It was no longer about business. It was existential. He had to know the source of that man's strength. What created a person like Samuel Croft? A man who could turn down a fortune to honor a promise. A man whose simple explanation of a leak had held an entire room of jaded sophisticates, spellbound. After 3 days of self-imposed isolation, Alistair did something he had not done in 20 years. He acted without a calculated strategy. He found out where Samuel lived, a modest, clean apartment in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, and he went there. He didn't take a car or a driver. He took a taxi, feeling like a tourist in his own city. He stood outside the simple brick building, feeling more nervous and out of place than he had ever felt in any boardroom. He wore a simple cashmere sweater and slacks, leaving the armor of his suit behind. He was not here as a titan of industry. He was here as a man adrift, seeking a map. He found Samuel sitting on a bench in a small park across the street, reading a book. He was off duty, wearing a simple shirt and worn trousers. He looked up as Alistair approached, and his eyes showed no surprise, no anger, only a calm, weary recognition. "Shut Mr. Finch," Samuel said, his voice neutral. He closed his book. Alistair didn't know what to say. The words, "I'm sorry," felt inadequate, a foreign currency he didn't know how to spend. He simply stood there for a moment, the great Alistair Finch, rendered speechless. "Why?" Alistair finally managed to ask, the word raw and small. "Why did you stay? Why turn down the world for that old man and his little restaurant?" Samuel looked at the trees, at the children playing on the swings in the distance. He seemed to be considering his answer carefully. "Because Mr. Thompson gave me a reason to get up in the morning when I thought I had none left," he said simply. "He didn't offer me a job. He offered me a routine, a purpose, a quiet place to stand while the world fell apart inside me. Some things are not a transaction." Alistair sat down on the bench, a few feet away from Samuel. The gesture felt like a surrender. "I don't understand that," Alistair confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "Everything is a transaction. Everything can be bought or sold. That's the only rule that makes sense. The only thing that protects you." "Protects you from what?" Samuel asked gently. The question pierced through Alistair's defenses. It was a question he had not allowed himself to ask in years. He looked at his hands, which had signed checks for billions of dollars, which had shaken on deals that changed skylines. They suddenly looked old and empty. "From loss," Alistair said, the word tasting like rust in his mouth. "From feeling what you feel when something is taken from you, something you can't buy back." And then, on that simple park bench, under the dappled sunlight, Alistair Finch began to talk. He spoke of his wife, Eleanor. He described her laughter, how it had been the only warmth in his life. He spoke of her sudden illness, a swift and merciless thief. He confessed that after she died, he had felt a terror so profound that he had resolved to build a fortress of wealth around himself, a wall so high and thick that no emotion could ever breach it again. He had equated love and sentiment with vulnerability, and he had systematically eliminated all vulnerability from his life. He had succeeded. He had become untouchable, and in doing so he had become a ghost in his own life, haunting the cold, empty rooms of his success. I thought if I owned enough of the world, he finished, his voice hoarse, I wouldn't have to feel how much of it I had lost. Samuel listened to the entire story without interruption. He did not offer platitudes or false comfort. He simply offered the gift of his silent, patient attention. When Alistair was finished, a profound quiet settled between them. Then Samuel spoke. I understand loss, Mr. Finch, he said, and the depth of sorrow in his voice made Alistair's own confession seem shallow by comparison. I created the solace soup for my daughter. Alistair looked at him, confused. Her name was Lily, Samuel continued, his gaze distant, looking at a memory only he could see. She was 7. She had hair the color of corn silk and a laugh like little bells. She was my world. Everything I did for her. He paused, taking a slow, steadying breath. She was killed. A car accident. A driver, young and reckless, ran a red light. It was instantaneous, they said. She felt no pain. A small mercy. The story was delivered without melodrama, a simple statement of an unbearable fact. After she was gone, the world lost its flavor, its color, its sound. I was like you, in a way. I wanted to build a wall, but I had nothing to build it with. So I retreated into memory. I tried to cook something that would taste like the memory of her warmth, the feeling of holding her hand. That's all the soup is, Mr. Finch. It's a memory in a bowl. It's the only thing I have left of her. Alistair was floored by the quiet devastation of the story. His own grief felt abstract next to this raw, specific pain. He felt a pang of something that was almost empathy. I am so sorry, he said, and this time the words felt real. Samuel nodded, accepting the sentiment. It was a long time ago, 15 years, October the 12th. Alistair froze. His blood ran cold. October the 12th. That was the day Eleanor had died. The date was burned into his memory, a permanent scar on the calendar. For a moment he could not breathe. It was a bizarre, meaningless coincidence, he told himself. Nothing more. But Samuel was not finished. The driver who killed her, Samuel said, his voice dropping even lower, as if he were sharing a terrible secret. He was driving a silver sports car, a gift, apparently, for his 21st birthday. He was distraught. He had just had a terrible fight with his father, a fight about money. Alistair felt the world dissolve into a roaring in his ears. He knew. Before Samuel even said the name, he knew. He remembered that day with sickening clarity. The fight with his son, Marcus. The shouting. The ugly words. Marcus storming out, grabbing the keys to the car Alistair had bought him as a substitute for affection. He had been on his way to the hospital to see Eleanor for the last time when the call came about Marcus's accident. He had been so consumed with his own drama, his own impending loss, that the details of the other victim had been a blur, a footnote in his own tragedy. A child, they had said. He had paid the lawyers to make it all go away. He had paid for the best care for Marcus's injuries. He had never even learned the name of the family he had destroyed. "His name was Marcus Finch," Samuel said, his voice devoid of accusation. It was a statement of fact, a final missing piece of a puzzle both men had been living inside for 15 years without knowing it. Alistair Finch made a sound, a choked, guttural noise of pure agony. The fortress he had spent a lifetime building had not just been breached, it had been leveled. The grief he had tried to outrun had been waiting for him all along, entwined with the very source of his wealth and his cruelty. His son, in a moment of reckless pain fueled by their toxic relationship, had taken everything from this good, quiet man. The two tragedies, which had defined and deformed both their lives, were not separate events. They were one. He looked at Samuel Croft, and for the first time, he did not see a waiter, an artist, or a symbol. He saw a man to whom he was connected by an unbreakable, unbearable bond of shared suffering. His money hadn't protected him from loss. It had been the very instrument of it. The realization crushed Alistair. He doubled over on the bench, his head in his hands, and he began to weep. They were not the tears of a powerful man, but the raw, ragged sobs of a broken one. He wept for his wife, for his estranged son, and for the little girl with hair like corn silk, whom he had never met, but whose life he was responsible for extinguishing. Samuel did not move. He did not touch him. He simply sat beside him in the quiet park, bearing witness to the complete collapse of a man who had thought he owned the world. In the wreckage of his soul, Alistair Finch was presented with a choice. He could disintegrate, consumed by the guilt and the horror of his discovery, or he could try to build something new from the ruins. For days, he did nothing. He sat in his silent penthouse, the ghost of his past now a constant, tangible presence. The story of what he had done, of the life his son had taken, was a weight that threatened to suffocate him. But then he thought of Samuel. He thought of the quiet dignity, the lack of accusation, the profound grace the man had shown. Samuel had found a way to transform his unbearable pain into an act of creation, into something that brought comfort to others. He had created solace from sorrow. Alistair, on the other hand, had created only coldness from his. He knew he could never undo what had been done. He could not bring back the dead, but he could honor them. He could try to create something that would be a testament not to his power, but to his repentance. He liquidated assets. He sold properties. He dismantled a significant portion of the financial empire he had spent a lifetime building. His accountants thought he was insane. His lawyers advised caution. He ignored them all. He was driven now by a mission that had nothing to do with profit. 2 months after their meeting in the park, he approached Samuel again. This time, he came to the Gilded Spoon during the quiet hours between lunch and dinner service. He came not as a conqueror, but as a supplicant. He laid out his plan on one of the empty, linen-covered tables. He was creating a foundation. It would be called the Eleanor and Lily Foundation. Its mission would be twofold. First, it would provide scholarships and grants to aspiring culinary artists from underprivileged backgrounds, giving them the chance to create their own art. Second, it would fund grief counseling centers and support groups for families who had lost children. "It is not a payment," Alistair said, his voice steady but stripped of all its former arrogance. "There is no payment for what was lost. It is a memorial, an attempt to build something that might bring the kind of comfort you have created." He pushed a final document across the table. "I want you to run it. he said. "I will provide the funds, but you will provide the vision. You will sit as chairman of the board. You will decide where the money goes. You will ensure it does actual good in the world. Your salary will be whatever you wish to write down." He was offering Samuel everything he had once tried to take from him: power, wealth, prestige. He was giving him control over a significant portion of his own fortune. It was the ultimate act of surrender, the only form of atonement he could conceive. Samuel looked at the documents, at the staggering sums of money, at the official letterhead. He saw the power being offered, but he also saw the man across the table, a man hollowed out by regret, desperately trying to find a path back to humanity. "I will accept," Samuel said quietly, "on one condition." Alistair nodded, ready to agree to anything. "You will not just provide the funds," Samuel said. "You will serve on the board with me, and once a week you will volunteer at one of the counseling centers, not as a benefactor, as a helper. You will listen to the stories of others. You will make coffee. You will wash the floors. You will learn the value of service, not with your checkbook, but with your hands." Alistair looked at Samuel, and a flicker of the old pride wanted to rebel. Him? Alistair Finch? Washing floors? But it died as quickly as it arose. He saw the wisdom in Samuel's condition. It was not a punishment. It was a prescription. It was the path to his own salvation. "I accept," Alistair said. And in that moment, the first stone of a new foundation was laid, not for a building, but for a man's soul. 1 year later, the world was a different place for both men. The Eleanor and Lily Foundation was a resounding success, a beacon of hope that had already changed dozens of lives. The Gilded Spoon was more popular than ever, with Mr. Thompson semi-retired and Samuel now a managing partner, though he still insisted on working the floor several nights a week. It kept him grounded, he said. The final tableau of their new world order took place not in the opulent dining room or a sterile boardroom, but in the small, clean kitchen of a grief counseling center funded by their foundation. Samuel was there, quietly mentoring a young chef, one of the foundation's first scholarship recipients. Alistair Finch was there too. He was wearing a simple apron over a plain polo shirt. His hands, once soft and manicured, were red and chapped from hot water and cleaning solutions. He was washing dishes, his movements practiced and efficient. There was no trace of the arrogant tyrant he had once been. His face was calmer, the hard lines softened by a humility that had been earned, not feigned. He found a quiet satisfaction in the simple, honest work. After the dinner service for the support group was over, Samuel brought 2 bowls of soup over to a small table in the corner of the kitchen. He sat down across from Alistair. For the first time, Alistair was about to taste the solace soup. He had never dared ask for it before. He had felt he hadn't earned the right. He picked up his spoon. He lifted it to his lips. The aroma alone was overwhelming, a scent of earth and warmth and something unnamably gentle. He took the first taste. It did not taste of rare ingredients or complex technique. It tasted of kindness. It tasted of patience. It tasted of a love so profound it could survive the most terrible of losses. It tasted like forgiveness. A single tear traced a path down Alistair Finch's cheek and fell into the bowl. It was not a tear of sadness or of guilt, but of gratitude. He finally understood. The story of Alistair Finch and Samuel Croft became a quiet legend, not of humiliation and revenge, but of redemption and the strange, fated connections that bind us all. It served as a powerful reminder that our greatest tragedies do not have to be the end of our stories. They can be the beginning of our humanity. The final, explicitly stated moral of their journey was clear to all who knew them. True wealth is not measured by what you accumulate for yourself, but by the solace you are able to offer others. It is measured in second chances, in shared burdens, and in the quiet, enduring grace of a human heart, willing to break open and begin again.